come to order. General Williamson, General Murray, General Walsh, General Shrader, Mr. William Taylor, we have agreed that we're all going to put our statements into the record so we can go directly to you. I understand that we're going to be having either votes called or they have been? Not yet. It is our hope that we can get through all of the opening statements and perhaps a few questions before we have to adjourn for votes. I believe we're turning to General Williamson first.
Chairman Turner, Ranking Member Songus, and distinguished members of the Subcommittee on Tactical Air and Land Forces, thank you for the invitation to discuss the Army's fiscal year 2017 ground force modernization programs, and for this opportunity to appear with our Navy and Marine Corps counterparts. We are proud to work with them in a number of critical areas, including the Joint Light Tactical Vehicle Program. With me today is Lieutenant General Mike Murray, the Army Deputy Chief of Staff, G8. Mr. Chairman, I thank you for making our written statement a part of the record for today's hearing. Mr. Chairman, the Army's #1 priority is readiness. This means that we can no longer equip and sustain the entire force with the most modern equipment. This is a fact based on our current fiscal situation. Still, the Army will focus its investments on supporting elements of readiness, which include key modernization programs. Equipping is and will always remain a critical component of readiness. Our equipment modernization strategy is focused on 5 capability areas. First, aviation, which I know we will not discuss today but remains a priority for the Army. Second, a robust network. That network has to be protected against cyber attacks. Key investments in this area include the Warfighter Information Network Tactical that provides us with networking on the move. Assured position navigation and timing for trusted information while operating in conditions that may impede or deny access to the global positioning system. Communication security and offensive and defensive cyber operations to protect our networks in cyberspace. Third, integrated air and missile defense to defeat a large portfolio of threats that range from small UAVs, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, mortars, and even threat aircraft. Key investments in this area include air and missile defense battle command system, an indirect fire protection capability, and modernization of the Patriot system. Fourth, our combat vehicle modernization provides future Army maneuver forces with increased mobility, survivability, and lethality. Specifically, the Army is investing in the ground mobility vehicle, mobile protected firepower, striker lethality upgrades, and the armored multipurpose vehicle. We are also incrementally modifying and modernizing existing systems to increase capabilities and to extend service life with improvements to the Abrams, the Bradley, and the Paladin systems. Finally, the Army will continue to address emerging threats by investing in mature technologies with the greatest potential for future use. These areas include the modular active protection system, electronic warfare, and combat vehicle prototyping. We continue to protect our science and technology funding so that the next generation of breakthrough technologies can be rapidly applied to our existing or our new equipment designs. While other services man equipment, the Army equips soldiers. Even with our modernization budget being at historic lows, our equipping mission remains essential. We cannot put our soldiers at risk by not providing them with the right equipment at the right time and the right place to accomplish their assigned missions. Mr. Chairman and distinguished members of this subcommittee, we greatly appreciate and thank you for your steadfast and strong support to the outstanding men and women of the United States Army, our Army civilians, and our Army families. This concludes my opening remarks, Mr. Chairman. We look forward to your questions.
Thank you, General Walsh.
Thank you, Chairman. Ranking Member Sanchez, I don't think she's here, but and distinguished members of the subcommittee for the opportunity to testify today before you on the Marine Corps ground modernization portfolio. Joining me today is Brigadier General Joe Shrader, Commander of Marine Corps Systems Command, and also Mr. Bill Taylor, our Program Executive Officer for Marine Corps Land Systems Command. I would also like to recognize our Army counterparts, Lieutenant General Williams and Murray, who I work very closely with It's essential to comment on our shared commitment on our programs together, and I'd also like to comment on our reinvigoration of our Marine Corps Board, which I think will help the subcommittee in the future to ensure that our two services remain closely aligned on our programs. The Marine Corps faces a challenging future operating environment with the Army, in which peer and near-peer adversaries approach parity with some key capabilities. Anti-access and area denial capabilities will proliferate, becoming cheaper, more lethal, and harder to target. Hybrid adversaries with mass signatures will fight in distributed fashion in densely populated urban littorals. U.S. satellite-based capabilities may be degraded or denied. Cyber threats will target the digital networks that are central to the way we currently fight, and adversaries will leverage advanced commercial off-the-shelf technologies to outcycle our acquisition process. Information warfare will exploit global communications and social media, and will face all these challenges in an era of reduced manpower and fiscal austerity. Our ground vehicle modernization strategy is to sequentially modernize priority capabilities, reduce equipment inventories wherever possible, and judicially sustain remaining equipment. The future security environment requires a robust capability to operate from the sea and maneuver ashore to the positions of advantage. The Amphibious Combat Vehicle Program enables us to do so. Is the Marine Corps' highest ground modernization priority and consists of 2 increments. This program, when coupled with improvements to our existing fleet of assault amphibians, generates a complementary set of capabilities to meet the general support lift capability and capacity requirements of our ground combat element. The second highest priority within a portfolio remains the replacement of our Humvee fleet that is most at risk. Those trucks that perform a combat function and are typically exposed to enemy fires. In partnership with the Army, the Marine Corps has sequenced in the JLTV program to ensure affordability of the entire ground combat tactical vehicle portfolio while replacing 5,500 units of the legacy Humvee fleet with the modern tactical trucks prior to fielding the first increment of our amphibious combat vehicle. These core Marine Corps modernization efforts have been designed in a manner to ensure their affordability. Finally, the ground air task-oriented radar that combines 5 current programs will enhance our ability to command and control across the Marine Air Ground Task Force. This solution allows us to support air defense, air surveillance, counter-targeting, counter-fire, air traffic control missions through simple software swaps on a single piece of hardware, a much more expeditionary solution than numerous radar solutions we currently have. It will increase our sensing and sharing effectiveness across the range of military operations, supporting missions in high-end conflict, hybrid warfare, and low-intensity conflict, and thus enabling the command and control of our forces. Thank you again for this opportunity. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you both. We have been informed, by the way, that votes will not be occurring, so we're going to be able to slow our pace down a bit. As you're all aware, the budget debate is gripping Capitol Hill currently. The budgets proposed by the president that was expected to come in concert with our 2-year budget deal was expected to have a number of 574 as the base number. It has fallen $18 billion short of that, and Congress is dutifully working to restore that $18 billion in the base budget number. However, it's my understanding that DOD has already been proceeding along the lines of the president's proposed budget, which of course includes the $18 billion shortfall. It's my understanding, General Murray, as a result of our meeting yesterday, that the Army's share of that shortfall was approximately $3.1 billion. Could you please provide the subcommittee with more details as to which programs and capabilities were impacted by this reduced budget request? Since Congress is diligently working to put those dollars back, it would aid us in our ability to understand what is at risk.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So we went back into some homework based upon our conversation yesterday. It's actually closer to 3.4. And the easiest way to explain that, because as you build a program, and we got the BBA about the early November timeframe, we were weeks away from dropping the 17 budget to OSD. So we had a very short time to work on it. But it's 3.4, and that is based upon what we said we needed to meet the requirements we've been given versus what we got under the BBA 15 agreement for 17. It covers a lot of categories. It covers military personnel account, which is a very small amount. It covers operations and maintenance, training. It covers research development and acquisition accounts, and it covers facilities accounts. Specific to your question, within the RDA account, it was about $570,000. I'm sorry, $570 million, and it was primarily where we took that cut was in aircraft modernization. So we went back and took Apaches, took a cut in Apache modernization, we took a cut in Black Hawk modernization, and we took a small cut in CH-47 modernization. Kept everything in compliance with the multi-year contracts, but basically brought aircraft modernization production to the floor to account for that cut. But 3.4 is really the answer to your question, sir.
Thank you. That helps us again in the debate and advocacy to try to restore those dollars with an understanding of what's at risk. General Murray, I also understand that the Army wants to redirect funding within ERI from operation and maintenance to procurement in order to begin the modernization of Abrams tanks and Bradley fighting vehicles to better deter against threats from Russian aggression. Could you please explain this plan, and do you require any specific authorities from the Armed Services Committee?
So we're gonna work with Congress, obviously, and it's a reprogramming action of the dollars that were given to us for the European Assurance Initiative, Reassurance Initiative. Once again, we came up with a plan, and this was a late breaking in the program development last year. We came up with a plan to put unmodernized equipment as part of the equipment build in Europe of the pre-positioned stocks. We went back and looked at that plan after we had some more time to do it and decided that we would be better off putting modernized equipment. So the original plan was to take unmodernized equipment, bring it to 1020 standards, and then send it over as the first installment of what will eventually become a division minus set in terms of pre-positioned stocks. In order to make modern equipment, we now have a plan to use what is already over there in the European activity set, bring that back to APS, the Army pre-position stocks, use brigades to rotate into Europe on a heel-to-toe rotation, which we have the funding for in the ERI OCO account, and then take the equipment we were going to send and use that to go to the next generation of tank and Bradley. So the Abrams A3 and the Bradley V4. To kind of jumpstart that production. So it's about $245 million. We just need to reprogram RDA, OMA, just change that over. So it's not an ask for more money than what's already in there. It's just a reprogram action, and we would appreciate the help with that.
For my last question, General Williamson, I understand the Army is planning to start an APS test and evaluation program that would integrate technologically mature systems on Abrams, Bradleys, and Strykers. Would you please provide us with an update on this program and comments on its schedule? And is this program fully funded in fiscal year 17?
Sir, thank you for the question. So the Active Protection System program, we're actually taking a dual path. So we have an established program. It's called the Modular Active Protection System. It really gives us an approach that allows us to look at a soft kill, looking at obscurance, looking at electronics in order to defeat threat missiles targeted at our systems. And then it continues to graduate into the hard kill, that is kinetic, being able to shoot down missiles fired at our equipment. The intent of the MAPS program, though, is to develop a very modular system that we can apply to the wide range of combat vehicles that we have in store. That's a 5-year program, sir, which we started last year from an S&T standpoint. And so it will be a couple of years before we're comfortable with that system being able to be applied to our combat vehicles. So in the interim, the second part of our strategy is to look at existing active protection systems, both domestically produced and even those that our allies have. We are now bringing those in this year and characterizing those on our systems to understand the performance, understand the integration effort, so that we can have a capability a lot quicker than the 5-year time frame. So our goal is to have capability within 2 years.
Excellent. Well, I think members of the committee are all well aware that Israel has already in Israel, deployed systems that are at least a good starting point for our discussion. We look forward to your evaluation
Yes, sir.
of those systems. Ms. Zongas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here. As I've served on the Armed Services Committee, it's been my experience that absent oversight from Congress, the services neglect to design and field equipment with specific requirements for women. We've seen some progress in the area of body armor, important progress. We know that in the area of shoes that are issued to our servicemen and women, there hasn't been a lot of thought about what a woman's foot might need in these challenging, given the demands on what she needs to do. And so I think with the Department of Defense having recently opened all combat-related positions to women in the military that meet the required standards, a move that I certainly support, I'd really like to ask, in the area of the newly opened positions, which include infantry positions previously closed to women, how are the Army and Marines adapting their infantry equipment requirements to account for these changes in policy? For example, will the next generation of soldier or Marine protective equipment, like body armor, be provided in a range of sizes, shapes, and configurations to account for more women in infantry units?
So ma'am, let me start from an Army perspective. So this is one of the things that we've made considerable progress in terms of our uniforms and also in our protective equipment. So I would start by telling you that we've added 8 additional sizes based on a better understanding of the stature, and that's so there's a level of complexity here that it's not just being smaller, it's proportions. So that's why there's so many additional sizes. And if anybody who's worn a piece of body armor knows that it's inconvenient enough without being able to appropriately size it. And so in the design of our new protective equipment, we've worked very hard as you look at both the torso, the hard armor protection, the extremities with the soft armor, and the sizing so that we can fit both women and smaller male soldiers appropriately.
General Walsh.
Ma'am, if I could, just real quickly to add what General Williamson said, I'm sorry. So you mentioned infantry specifically, which is near and dear to my heart, but so it's not only the body armor that they're wearing, it's also the equipment they're carrying in terms of, and it's not a gender thing, but it's lightening the load. So, I mean, there's a very conscientious effort, and we're making some pretty good progress on lightening the launch unit for the Javelin, on lightening tripods for the machine guns, on lightening the machine guns themselves. And then something that I'm very excited about, we've been talking about a long time that we're making some pretty good progress on is basically a robot that follows a squad that could take anywhere from 300 to 1,200 pounds off of an infantry squad, be it whatever gender it is, and carries the load for them in remote. And so they're not carrying all that equipment. And also gives them the ability to lessen the load on batteries as well, because it serves as a battery charger. So there's efforts. And like I said, it's not gender specific, but there's efforts going on in a lot of different areas to try to lighten the load we're asking our soldiers to carry.
Well, we've certainly seen a lot of evidence that the load of the body armor, even while it was very protective, caused long-term damage and costs that we're going to be dealing with for many years to come. So the effort to lighten the load is important across all areas of the equipment.
Congresswoman, very close to what General Murray and General Williamson said on our part is start off with the lightening the load piece. It's a huge piece that we're looking at with the amount of technology, as you're aware of, that we're putting on our Marines to be able to operate in distributed manner. The weight increases, so we've been very focused on continuing to try to lighten that load. And just as we talked about robotic capabilities, we're looking at, we just did a limited objective experiment where we looked at taking infantry company and how they would use infantry transportation vehicles, small vehicles, ACV type, that would be able to carry some of the loads with them to be able to lighten that load. So they're able to be more mobile in a foot mobile, because the Marine Corps is a very foot mobile organization and we have to travel that way. As far as the female piece of it specifically, we're continuing to look at our policies and the gear that we've got. We originally had a policy where we had the gear we were buying for our our protection systems was based on a low end of 5% of the Marines gender neutral, to 95%. That was the percentage that we were buying the gear to. Since then, we've looked at that, and right now I've got a policy change that I've got to change our requirements document to take that down to 2%, the lowest of the females, and take that all the way up to 98% of the males. Because what we were finding was when we were at that 5% of buying gear just for 5% of the total Marine Corps, that a lot of the females were falling below that, and the gear wasn't fitting them accordingly. Just as General Williamson said too, we also have looked at the size of the gear, and we've added another short version of our vests, which carry a lot of our armor protection.
And how are you all doing in fielding the new body armor that's been developed for women, especially the Army? But I'm also curious to hear from you, General Walsh.
Yes, ma'am. So the procurement objective, and we may not get there, is about 72,000 sets, and 5,500 have been fielded. And we field to deploying soldiers, male or female, so it becomes a cascading. So as female soldiers and male soldiers deploy, the form-fitted, new, really IOTV, the vest, is fielded. So 5,500 fielded, acquisition objective of somewhere around 7,200. But as you know, in the body armor, it's very short acquisition cycles because we want to take advantage of newest technologies that becomes available.
I'll just start by saying that we've added about 3,800 of those protective vests, and I'll just turn it over to General Shrader for any details he'd like to add.
Constable, thank you for the question. So General Walsh talked about we dropped below the 5% down into the 2%. What led us there was an anthropometric fit study that we did. We started a number of years ago, and the timing of it was fortuitous that it ended along with this decision that was made. Led us to look at those extra small sizes, the stature sizes, and led us to purchase, like General Walsh said, the 3,800 extra sizes or extra sets that were down in that 2 percentile range, extra small sizes. So we're fielding those now. I would also mention that we're looking at how the load-bearing system integrates onto the smaller stature as well. What are the second and third order effects with regard to injuries and those types of issues? So we have an organization within my command called the Marine Expeditionary Rifle Squad, or MERS, and it exists a place called Grunt Works, where we have an exercise physiologist on staff that examines all of this data that we pull from the schoolhouses to look at the injuries that may be occurring and see how that can inform how we change any of our body armor and any of our load-bearing systems. We just fielded a new pack in the Marine Corps, and we're now looking at how does it ride on the body? Does it need to ride higher on smaller stature Marines instead of on the hips, and those types of issues. So we are full steam ahead, man, looking at those smaller sets.
Well, one of the more alarming things I learned after the Army first began to develop body armor for women was I learned that in the previous armor that they were wearing, the male version, that often it compromised a woman's ability to lift her arm appropriately to fire whatever she needed to do. So there are real risks to not moving ahead in a very expeditious way, especially given the opening of all these combat positions to women. So I thank you. I yield back.
Excellent questioning. Thank you. Mr. Lubriando.
Thank you for being here and for all that you do. General Murray, in the battle space, whether air, land, or sea, it's always the tangible items that are given the most interest from the Department of Defense, Congress, and the general public, because they're the things that we can reach out and touch and physically see. However, sometimes the invisible items, mainly C4ISR capabilities and resiliency, that determine success in the modern battle space. Along those lines, can you update the committee on the tactical radio program, specifically HMS, and what the Army is doing to move this program along as expeditiously as possible?
So I'll kind of cover it very broadly, and I know General Williamson's got much more depth into it, and I'll pass it over to General Williamson. So, I mean, there's within our network, which General Williamson said was #2 priority in terms of the 17 budget, and the overall umbrella would be our WIN-T program. There's several layers we're talking about. The HMS Manpack radio is absolutely a key component within what we're trying to do in terms of pushing command or on-the-move capability down to multiple echelons, as well as connecting lower and upper mid-tier echelons of command, so connecting companies up through battalion to brigade and then that on-the-move capability. And basically, HMS is a critical capability within that, and then General Williams will pick it up from there.
So really appreciate the question. The radio program is something that I've been invested in for a number of years. So I'm happy to report that the HMS handheld radio, so we just had a contract award on the 26th of February. And that the reason I'm pleased with that is that there were multiple vendors who are now qualified, which means that we will have competition that will allow us to get the best price for the taxpayer and give the best capability to soldiers. And so when we talk about the HMS program, it really represents two pieces. One, a Manpack radio that's 2 channels that allows us to have satellite communications as well as direct line of sight. That program, we've fielded roughly about 5,000 of those radios, and we're going in now for a lighter version. This gets to Ms. Songus' question is, how do we lighten the load? So one of the things that we're doing with that radio is how do we make that smaller and increase range? The radio contract that we just awarded last week will be for a smaller handheld radio that's used at the squad level, and we believe that we'll go through a series of tests with the 3 vendors, and we will down select. I can't tell you today whether that's 1 or 2. My goal is always to maintain competition. So I think both programs are moving forward very steadily, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yield back.
Mr. Cook.
Sleeping on a switch here. I had a couple of questions on standardization of ammo. When I'm thinking about the Stryker, and I'm thinking about the Bradley, and I'm thinking about the LAV. And you know, I'm not as smart as anybody in this room here. I'm just a dumb grunt. But why we have 25 millimeter for one and 30 for the other. I'm a big fan of the Stryker, and I like going up to the 30 millimeter. But I've also heard some rumors that some of the troops, I got Fort Irwin, that they're grumbling a little bit about the 25 millimeter, and even in the Marine Corps, whether it's capable to standardize that equipment or whether we have to retool all those vehicles, if you could kind of comment on that. Because I'm going to ask the same question about why the Marine Corps has its own 5.56 and the Army has its own 5.56. And when we go into these budget wars where we're supposed to have our act together in terms of efficiency and effectiveness, and we're trying to make the argument, and you've got a lot of people here that are, quite frankly, hawks, and we're going to be fighting other people that want to cut your budgets. These are answers that I think are imperative to some of the discussions that we have. So, is that too much of a grenade?
No, sir. So, I mean, you're absolutely correct. So the 30 millimeter is the current weapon system. It's not done yet, as you know. We're still building, upgrading the Strikers 81 per BCT, starting with the regiment in Germany. And the 25, I know of, and General Williamson can talk more detail, I know of no plans to try to go back in and re-engineer the Bradley for a 30 millimeter. A lot of that may be the integration piece of it is just too difficult. And as spending a lot of time in a Bradley myself, I personally think the 25 with the right ammo is a very effective weapon system. The 30, in Bradleys normally are around tanks, so I mean that was part of the discussion in terms of 30 millimeter versus a smaller gun for the Strikers. Strikers are not necessarily so there's a lot that went into it. But and I'll turn it over to General Williamson. But 30 on the Stryker, 25 on the Bradley is where we intend to stay.
So sir, just 2 points. So I do appreciate the concern about multiple weapon systems and then the associated tail that comes with multiple variations of ammunition. But the start point is the investment that would be required to go back and touch all of the 25 millimeters, which is a very capable weapon system. that is a significant investment. I've spent time with our ammunition and our ballistics folks, and I would tell you that the 30 millimeter that gets added to the Stryker gives it an incredible capability. And part of the motivation there is it's on two fronts. So one, it gives you a capability to be able to address lightly armored, lightly skinned vehicles. But that weapon also gives you a tremendous capability in engaging enemy in the open and at range. And so we believe it adds a tremendous amount of capability to that Stryker force, especially as you look at our desire to provide additional capability starting in Europe. And that's the direction that we've headed. There will be a separate decision that will be made by the leadership of the Army that talks about how far you go with that Stryker lethality package and the 30 millimeter.
Congressman, I think the first thing I would say is whenever we can, our intent is to buy with the Army in the same program. So everything going forward, that's what we try to look at, and I look forward to trying to answer that 556 question later when you bring that forward. On the LAV specifically, as we look at our priorities between, we've got, first priority really is affordability on the ACV and the JLTV, trying to get those programs forward. Trying to give more firepower to our LAV program, along with keeping them around longer. We focused really on their obsolescence and keeping them going from a obsolescence standpoint, but also the LAV anti-tank program. That's really our focus right now, has been to upgun them with this new anti-tank capability. I think the same thing that General Murray had said is to try to upgun and take a older vehicle like this at this point in time. We're trying to bring in new programs and try to bring a higher caliber capability in. It's just not as affordability standpoint where we can afford to go right now.
I yield back.
To our next questions, I want to just read the list so people know where they are on the list currently for asking questions. We've got Mr. Tarkai, MacArthur, Graham, Gibson, Waltz, McSally, Moulton, Walorski, and then Duckworth. That's the current order. Mr. Tarkai.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Aloha, Generals. I'm concerned about the cycle we go through in upgrading and modernizing the technologies that our war fighters employ in combat on the ground. As you know, we have found ourselves in situations in the past where we have deployed troops without the proper equipment because of our modernization cycles that have been underfunded. Today, I want to ask about a couple of programs, mainly in the ground system acquisition and communication. First, General Williamson. It appears the Army has issued an unfinanced requirement list, which seeks 16 additional M88s A2 improved recovery vehicles. Will these be the older A1 vehicles that are improved to create the A2 versions? And how many M88 A1 Hercules, the older variant, will remain in the Army's inventory after completion of the current program funding?
So, sir, I will have to come back and tell you what the total number is, but the answer to your first question is that it's an upgrade to the existing 88s.
Okay, yeah, please get back to us on the other question. And then General Walsh, the networking on the MOVE system is a transformational command and control capability for all elements of the Marine Air-Ground Task Force. The LOC was received in October 2014, requiring an increase in the approved acquisition objective from 56 to 140 not M systems. Where the program office, where is the program office at with contracting production of these remaining systems?
Thank you, Congressman. I'll start off by giving you a broad overview of where we're at in the NOTAM program, and then I'll turn it over to General Shrader to finish the question on exactly where we're at. What I would say is the Network on the Move program is really, as you look at the modern battlefield, is really trying to connect our capabilities. So if we've been in Iraq and Afghanistan in very immovable forward operating bases, combat outpost, we've been in the same location in the same area for a long time. We're operating on there, and we got our command operations center there. And we've been able to bring that technology in, really have a lot of situational space awareness of what's going on in that area. On the future battlefield operating in a distributed manner, when we have to push our forces out, they're more on the move and have to be able to distribute it more. The ability to share share that information and enable our forces to operate as a command post on the move. And that basically is what our network on the move capability is doing. So as we're going through this program, we started off with our ground combat vehicle program, have now moved it into our ITV or smaller vehicle program. And now what we're also seeing is we've got urgent needs requests from our special purpose MAGTFs that are forward, requesting the same type of vehicle that would tie into the aircraft that are deploying. So we've changed the program to also add the addition of a network on the move airborne into the network on the move ground program we have. So the ability to connect, mesh net that capability from the aircraft down to the ground commanders. And the specific requirement came out of the special purpose MAGTF was when they're en route for long hours on a mission, they want to be able to have the battlefield awareness like a moving jump CP would have when they get on the ground. So we've increased the program to also take that into consideration. So the program's changing a lot because technology is changing so rapidly, of using that network on the move program to be able to bring more capabilities into it, to give more added capabilities. Technology continues to spin up. And with that, I'll turn it over to General Shrader.
I had another question. So if you could, General, just answer the question regarding where we are in terms of contracting.
Sir, to be honest with you, specifically where we are to contracting, I'll have to come back to you. I do know that the 140 systems is fully funded. Right now, the issue that we're really getting at with NAUTM is that capability is really key to where the Marine Corps is trying to go with regard to distributed operations in the command and control node. The big thing that we're getting at in NAUTM is the size, weight, and power issues. We're trying to shrink the size and the weight and the amount of power that it draws on that system. But I will, if I could, sir, come back to you exactly where we are with the contracting and fully funding on the program.
Okay, thank you. I've run out of time, so Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. MacArthur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to talk about unfunded priorities for a few moments. And just clarify before I get specific, did you base your unfunded requirements list on the PB-17 or on the full $574 billion?
Sir, we based it on the budget that we submitted. So part of that was the difference between what we built the POM against and what we got in terms of the BBA. So part of that was to backfill the BBA cut, if that makes sense to you. That was a big piece of it.
I want to make sure I understand that. So it was based on the lower.
Oh, yes, sir.
Based on the lower numbers.
Yes, sir.
And I would just reiterate exactly the same thing. As we were working off originally what we thought we would have originally. When the BBA came in, some things had to get pushed out, and that's, the pressure of the budget that we had to lower. The BBA helped us with 2 years of funding that gave us stability and predictability in our time period, but the reduction of that pressure, budget pressure, ended up pushing some things that we couldn't fit into the budget numbers that we had. So the unfunded list takes into account those things that we originally would have bought, but now we're unable to buy.
So I'd like to get a sense of the top 2 or 3 for the most important things that got left off.
Yes, sir, I'll start. So the first one would be what was reduced in the 17 budget over what we said we needed. So it's the restoration of the BBA cut we took in 17. The second one would probably be increased readiness. As you know, the theme in this year's budget for the Army is near-term readiness. It's about a 5% increase in readiness, so buyback. More readiness in terms of home station training, flying hours, some training ammunition, and then probably number 3 would be we started to explore the recommendations based on the National Commission of the Future Army, those 63 recommendations they made, and some of those are fairly expensive if we go with those recommendations.
General Walsh?
You know, I'm looking at our list, and we really, I don't know if we've had a chance to really prioritize the list as far as what I would look at. I know we certainly have aircraft items that we've got in there, specific aircraft capabilities, some of our information warfare capabilities that we've got, and some of our UAS capabilities, what I would say. But I'll have to get back to you on prioritization of it. It's more of a list that we've got blocked off by procurement areas without really prioritizing it. So I'll have to get back with you on an answer on that.
We throw around very large numbers with these budgets. Whether it's 18 billion more or less, these are very big numbers. And yet they make a difference. Clearly, they make a difference. You mentioned readiness, training, airtime, things of that sort. Does that translate in a tangible way, in your mind, to increase risk to the men and women we put in harm's way?
In terms of the lack of that funding? Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. So, I mean, and General Milley and General Ellen since has testified, and the Acting Secretary of the Army, the Honorable Murphy, that this budget, I mean, we're doubling down on near-term readiness, and it's based upon what's going on in the world today. It's current threats, it's emerging threats, and it's the potential. And you can argue whether that potential is increasing or it stays the same, that we're going to send America's sons and daughters into harm's way in the near future. And so it's going after the near-term readiness, because the one thing none of us can afford to do is get up in the morning and look ourselves in the mirror and say, we could have prepared them better when they go. So that's why we were very focused, at the expense of everything else in the Army's budget, on making sure that we're ready as we can be, as quickly as we can be. And so that's where the risk is.
And so just to be really clear, we're not talking about maybe so readiness. We're not talking about being ready for what might happen that we can't foresee, something around the corner. We're talking about near-term readiness to face threats already upon us is tangibly compromised by these differences between the full $574 billion and in your case, the $3.4 billion reduction because of this $18 billion cut. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
If I could add from the Marine Corps side on that is that balance we've been having to work with between, you know, a forward presence force that we are with the United States Navy, and that balance of readiness, because we're forward all the time, along with the Marines and soldiers we've got deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan. That's been a constant battle. We've been focusing very heavily on the readiness side at the expense of modernization. I think if I look at the numbers between the last since 03 to 16 to now, our investments for readiness has remained the same. We're continually modernization. Our modernization accounts or investments accounts have gone down from about 17% average over that time to about 10% now.
Thank you. I'm out of time, but I appreciate it. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Ms. Grimm.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Congressman MacArthur just took my question, but that's okay. It was a great answer. Appreciate the information. So I will ask a different question. Thank you, gentlemen, first of all, for being here very much. As a new member of this committee, we spend a lot of time focused on the challenges we face in the Middle East, which has a unique topography, and I'm sure you're training for that type of a potential conflict environment. What would happen if something sprung up in a different part of the world? Would there be would the training that's going on now be in any way an additional challenge to, say, a jungle environment or something that wasn't like the Middle East? And what will we need to do to pivot to a different battlefield? Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for that. And so it's not really a budget question or a modernization question, but just based upon 33 years of doing this, it's really, you know, where you are and what the geography looks like, the conditions that you fight in, is really what we would call a condition. So we train to a common standard for specific tasks, and those are really applicable no matter where you employ those, both individually and collectively. Would the jungle versus the desert versus the Arctic have an impact? Yes. we'd have to account for that. But, you know, how we perform a certain task doesn't necessarily change, and the standards we perform that task to doesn't change. It's the conditions that really change, if that answers your question.
So, ma'am, I just want to add a modernization piece to that. And it really gets to some of the questions that we've had in the past regarding the time it takes and the investment it takes in modernization. And so what we don't have the luxury of is building systems that are very specific to a particular environment. And that's why we design systems that have multiple uses and can operate in cold weather regions as well as in the jungle. And to do that and to make sure that you have the reliability that that weapon system needs to give you in a cold weather as well as in a hot weather region requires us to make an investment on the engineering side and on the testing side to ensure that we don't put a soldier in harm's way because we've placed them in an environment where the effects of the geography, of the weather, all of those factors can put them at risk.
Yes, Congressman, I think, you know, we have been focused very much on the Middle East for a good reason for a long time, but we are changing that. There was obviously from the administration with the rebalance to the Pacific. We had taken a lot of our forces out of the Pacific region, which we did a lot of jungle training when we were there. We've got 4 full battalions back there. We've really kind of regenerated that force. Today, as we speak, we've got 1,900 Marines up in north of the Arctic Circle, up in exercise called Cold Response with our NATO allies and working with the Norwegians. We're looking at our cold weather gear, and then we're relearning our cold weather capabilities that we've not had since really the Cold War really used significantly. General Shrader's looking at very closely at what gear we still need to reconstitute to be able to we're capable in those areas. Right now, the Commandant's got me responsible for a program called Marine Corps Force 2025, and we're looking at this future operating environment, which is looked at not just what we've been looking at with counterinsurgency, counterterrorism operations in the Middle East, but how will we fight in the future against this hybrid threat, against a high-end near-peer competitor that we see both from the capabilities that Russia and China proliferate, and how we'll operate in that environment. So right now we're going through a detailed look at our force unit by unit and see how are we structured from a capability standpoint. Do we have the right formations and do we have the right capabilities to go with it? But it is certainly, this operating environment we're in today is forcing us to look at things completely different than we have in the last 15 years.
Yes, ma'am. I would just say just exactly what Lieutenant General Williamson said. You know, when it comes to a system, designing it and testing it for the full spectrum across all the environments, that's really what takes a lot of time. You know, we'll have a system specifically designed to do one thing, but then when we put it through the environmental type testing is what really will sometimes make us go back and have to redesign it. So, yes, ma'am.
Well, I thank you, and I have 17, 16, 15 seconds left. So I want to put in a shameless plug. I have a wonderful company in my district that's developing improved batteries. You know, we're all tethered to our units today. And I look forward to working with you all and talking about the benefits that these batteries will bring. And I think you may have already had some discussions, but I look forward to the future opportunities. Thank you, and my time is now out. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Gibson?
Well, thanks, Mr. Chairman. And gentlemen, thank you for your service, your leadership, the sacrifices of your families. And the question I have is going to be for both the Army and the Marine Corps. And as a premise for that, myself, the chairman, Sergeant Major Congressman Walsh, and others here in the committee, we have introduced a bill to stop the drawdown for the land forces. We know that this is a very serious bill because it has consequences, it has impacts all across the budget. It is our judgment that, you know, given the assumptions that were in place when decisions were made on the sizing of the land forces, we think there's been significant change and much more risk today, such that the risk to deterrence, the risk to fighting and winning the war, and the risk to families in terms of dwell time and impacts are such that we feel the need to come forward with the bill. My question to the witnesses today has to do with impacts on modernization. So the staff, we're in the process of collecting information as to what the price tag would be for that, because the leaders of both the Army and the Marine Corps have been very clear that while concurring with risk assessments, it's paramount that we not hollow out the force. so that we have the resources necessary to not only man the force, but to equip it, to modernize it, and to still make the investments across the full spectrum, family readiness, and also R&D. So I throw it over to the panel in terms of what that means in as much specificity as you can give today, but then, of course, for the record, if you wanted to follow that up, because we are going through this in great detail here in the committee.
So, Congressman Gibson, thank you for that question, and you took away my line. So both General Milley and General Allen have talked about this specific issue, and I think what both of them said, and you've alluded to this all along, is an increase in end strength without an increase in top line would just make the problems we have right now even worse in terms of how do you balance structure versus readiness versus modernization. And I really think it talks about, you know, if this were to come to pass, is what type of formations would be built with that increase in terms of a modernization bill. So until we get a little bit further down the road, and if it happens, you know, what specifically are we talking about, I could come back to you with a lot greater detail in terms of what it would take to equip and modernize those additional formations, if that gets a little bit at your question.
Congressman Gibson, thank you also for that question. I think looking back, you know, when the Marine Corps was downsizing from 200 to 2,000 and we were on that slope down trying to figure out what was a good number for us, I think we came up with a number of about 186 at that time. And we ended up with 182, which we're probably about 183 right now on that slope down to 182. As we looked at that is what are the trades as you start to come down, and just like General Murray said, you start, you know, balancing readiness, force structure, modernization. So I think as we look at that, deployment to dwell is one of those things. What are we being challenged to do with right now? And our op tempo certainly has not changed a whole lot. I mean, we're a very busy force, a very busy Marine Corps. So from a structure standpoint, you can only push the troops so hard. So any increase in strength, I think it certainly, like you talked about, is going to have some cost to it, some increase in resources. So it can't just be an in-strength add. We've got to be able to have the resource. So going back to that Marine Corps Force 2025 that we're in the middle of doing right now, is the assumption right now that we're going at is we maintain the 182,000 foot number structure. And how do we gain in added capabilities that we need within that structure? So the trades we're looking at in there as we drill down right now, things such as, you know, information warfare, as quickly as that's moving, the technology in that area with cyber, electronic warfare, information operations, more command and control capabilities, all those coming across, and a lot of those Marines that come in that area that are signals intelligence, electronic warfare capability, and our communications and computer capabilities, those are more senior Marines. So we're in the process of trying to grow a more senior force in a lot of ways and try to retain more seniors. That also comes with a cost. So I think it just like General Murray said, we'd have to get back to you. We're right in the middle of this drill down in it. On what we need in the future force. The goal we're at right now is if we had to maintain it at 182, knowing what adds we would have to get, what capabilities we'd have, knowing that we're going to have to take risk and trying to determine where the risk would come in that area. So as we go through this and we start moving towards a quadrennial defense review position, we're going to already have kind of in our mind what are the things we need to have to be a more modern force. We're then going to have to determine is, do we have to take risk from other areas to be that more modern force, or would there be a top-line add increase in force structure like you suggest, and what would be the bill that would go with it?
And Chairman, if I just to close here, I had a chance to talk to the Commandant last week about this, and for your situation awareness, it's 184 is the number in the bill, and I know that the Marine Corps right now is struggling with, and even looking at some what I would consider uncomfortable questions as to what would have to be decremented to build and to meet some of the priorities. So I think the 184 is probably a good number for the Marine Corps, better than 182, but knowing that we have to get this overarching cost filtered into that.
If I could just follow up, and I know the Commandant had testified to this also, that, you know, as we look at that, he's looking at even within our formations, such as our infantry battalions. Right. So if you take an infantry battalion that has 950 Marines today, a very formidable fighting force, but know that we don't have the 21st century type capabilities that we need in the future to fight on that modern battlefield against near-peer threats and hybrid competitors. So if you're going to have to do a zero-sum trade in there, you're going to have to take away some of your infantry firepower capabilities that you've got right now.
Yeah, that concerned me.
Bring in some of those other ones.
Right, thanks so much. I yield back.
Ms. Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Williamson, I'd like to talk a little bit about the tactical wheeled vehicle fleet and the Army's plans on divesting of 26,000 Humvees at FY16, but then also in terms of the shortage that I see we're having with shortage of heavy equipment prime movers. That was something that was brought up in the National Commission on the Future of the Army's report. I'm just going to read from it. It says, there seems to be some commanders indicated that to the commission that tactical wheeled vehicle shortages in their units are creating significant risks, and that these shortages are most pronounced in heavy equipment prime movers. Giving an anecdotal story even that we have had to rely on our European allies to transport our tanks in support of the European Resurgence Initiative. So if we're facing readiness issues in tactical wheeled mobility, what is the rationale for such a large Humvee divestiture? And where in the fleet are you accepting the most risk? Is it Humvees, medium lift, heavy lift?
So ma'am, I'm going to ask General Murray to talk the bigger modernization strategy, and then I'd like to come back and talk to you about a specific set of tactical vehicles.
Okay.
So, ma'am, and I'll address this with the European HETs first. So it's not a numbers issue for the HETs in Europe. It's the restrictions on the road networks in Europe. So the European HETs have more axles, distributes the weight differently than U.S. HETs, and so it becomes a weight issue. And that's specifically with the move into Eastern Europe with the European Activity Set equipment is where we first discovered that.
Okay, fair enough.
On the National Commission report, ma'am, and I'm very familiar with that because we're working that within the G8, and I can't remember the specific number of that recommendation, but I believe the Commission asked us to come back and do a study on that and then come back to Congress and report out, which we will absolutely do. Our numbers don't necessarily agree with the Commission's report. It's for both the light, the medium, and the heavy. We're showing excess wheeled vehicles. So we've got some work to do to figure out where the disconnect between what the Commission is. It might have been as simple as they went to a unit and that unit just hadn't fielded yet, or the distribution wasn't right within that post camp or station. We've got some work to do to figure out where the disconnect is, and we're looking at that right now. And we are very happy to come back and as the report asked for, to kind of lay out for you and others where we see ourselves in terms of wheeled vehicles in all three categories.
Okay. Before we go back to General Williamson, could you address a little bit the Humvee modernization in the Guard? We're in the Guard and Reserve. Congress provided $523 million for that. My understanding is that the Humvee will remain in the fleet until at least 2035. So could you tell us what the status of the funds are and what the Army strategy is for obligating that money? And how does the Army plan on using that money to address the Humvee modernization shortfalls in the Guard and Reserve? And then back to General Williamson, or whoever wants to answer that.
So ma'am, let me talk the Humvee specifically. So what I would say, with the help of Congress, we've had the opportunity to really do two things in the Humvee fleet. One, we've been able to do a recap. So as you looked at the existing set of up-armored Humvees, there was an issue with weight. You know, when you looked at the suspension, when you added all of that armor. So that money allowed us to go back in and do an upgrade to the suspension, to the powertrain, in order to bring those vehicles up. So that's part one. Part two is that it also allowed us to procure a number of ambulances, a significant number of ambulances for the Reserve and the National Guard. So as I look at 16, 17, and 18, that funding has given us a great ability to upgrade over 400 vehicles in the Reserve and about 1,000 in the National Guard. That program's on track. And the only other comment I would make, ma'am, is that it's also been a great example of the public partnership that we've had with industry and with our organic industrial base. And so being able to tear them down in an organic facility and then be able to have them built back up with our vendors has given us some true cost efficiency, and we've done a great job getting those capabilities back out to the force.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. McSally.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen. I do want to follow up just to clarify on the question about the female PPE. Just in case any Neanderthals try and seize what you said to use it for unintended purposes. The lightening of the load that you all talked about has nothing to do with women being in your units, right? These are efforts that have been ongoing because it's in our best interest to have the lightest load possible for our soldiers and Marines?
Absolutely, ma'am. And so, so we approach the soldier protection system from the level that we always want to find ways to improve its capability, but also lighten the load. Whether you're talking about the protective vest or whether you're talking about the helmet, it has nothing to do with whether you're a male or a female. We can't burden our soldiers with more weight.
So we all agree that a lighter load on any soldier, regardless of your gender, is going to make them a better warfighting capability. So this is a great effort having nothing to do with women's integration.
Yes, ma'am.
And you agree? Walsh?
Yes, Congresswoman, same thing. I mean, we're looking at the same thing. It's just how do we lighten it for all our Marines? So if you're a 100-pound, 5-foot artillery person out there and you've got to lift artillery shells or charges up and get them up into the cannon or up onto the truck that's going to move them, it's the same thing whether it's a male or female. It's the standards we have, and how can we help them to lighten those capabilities in all MOSs? It's not just your infantry MOSs. How do we make it easier for them?
Great. And similarly, obviously, you can both agree that having equipment and PPE that fits you as an individual, regardless of your gender, you could be a 120-pound guy that's short, who's also serving, that it's best to have everybody fit their equipment in order for them to be the best fighting force, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, just wanted to make sure.
I think it's forced us to look at that real hard.
On the record, so Neanderthals alert there. Okay, my next question is about the capabilities that we're talking about with the JAGM, the air-to-ground missile. It's an incremental approach in the budget, with the dual mode seeker being the one that's focused on in FY17, whereas the tri-mode seeker, provides obviously a greater capability. So just wanted to get some thoughts on whether there's an opportunity or what your thoughts are, maybe accelerating the increment 2 modernization, or just your input on that.
So, ma'am, the only comment I would make is that we've looked at the JAGM capability both from funding, but also from an engineering effort. And so we're very comfortable that programmatically, the timeline that we've used is really about addressing risk. And I think I would be concerned programmatically about trying to accelerate it too much at this point. We will monitor it.
Okay.
And I can provide additional details as required, but right now we're very comfortable with the JAGM program.
And just focusing on increment 1 then, the dual mode seeker right now.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Next question, I don't have your unfunded list. I just want to follow up on Congressman MacArthur and just clarify. Do either the Army and the Marines, do you have anything related to counter-IED technology on your unfunded list, or have you asked or received everything in the President's budget that you needed related to counter-IED?
Ma'am, I don't have all the details of the UFR. I have to come back to you.
Okay.
And I can't recall off the top of my head whether we do or not, so I'll take that for due out.
Okay, thanks. In the past, we've had some discussions here about counter-IED funding versus other types of funding, which we all agree we should probably be able to do both for supporting our troops. So I just want to make sure we're clear that there's no unfunded requests there. Can we also follow back up on the WIN-T? Is everything that's in the President's budget request what you would recommend, or is there anything related to WIN-T acceleration or additional funding on your unfunded request list?
So ma'am, as you know, on the WIN-T program, we just recently, last year, received a production decision that allowed us to go into full rate production. What the Army has done, though, and this is not related to the technology associated with the WIN-T, but what we've done with the program is spaced it so that we have the ability to field the system to units in a priority order. I'm very comfortable with where we're at with the WIN-T program right now.
Okay.
I am not tracking a desire to accelerate that at this point, but I'll go back and look at it.
Okay, great, thank you. And last question is, the future of the Army talked about a gap in electronic warfare capability for the Army. Do you have any comments related to EW capabilities that could be addressed or accelerated?
I do, ma'am. So it's one of the areas, as we talked about in our opening statement. Electronic warfare is one of those areas that we are concerned with it's an effect on our ability to operate. And the concern I would have, ma'am, is that as you look at the access to technologies, so our current adversaries and our potential adversaries have the ability to draw from the internet, from the available technology that's out there, and develop counters
Right.
to some of our very important systems. It's critical for us to make an investment in EW and electronic warfare.
Okay, great. I'm out of time, but I appreciate following up on that maybe with you later. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And to begin our second round of questions, General Walsh, in the beginning of the questioning, I asked General Murray to respond to the issue of the budget debate that's ongoing. As you're aware, there was an expectation that the two-year budget deal had a floor base budget amount of $574. The president's budget request came in $18 billion under that. Congress is continuing to have a debate about replacing that $18 billion, taking us back to $574. General Murray and the Army had given us numbers indicating that their portion of that $18 billion, if it is restored, was $3.1 billion. And I understand in response to your questions to Mr. MacArthur on the unfunded requirements list that you have not yet prioritized. Have you yet determined what your portion of the $18 billion shortfall will be?
Specifically, the 18 billion, no, I'd have to get back with you and answer on what we figured. We've got our unfunded list and with that priority, how much we have on that, but I don't think it's tied exactly to the 18 billion.
As with my questioning to
Right.
General Murray, obviously, it would be helpful because as we go to restore the 18 billion, being able to understand to what extent that restores a portion of your budget and what on the priorities would be on the unfunded requirements list, it gives us an ability to evaluate the benefit of being able to restore those funds. Thank you, General. Turning to Ms. Zongas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to ask a question about the soldier protection system. The 2017 budget request shows a significant research and development increase from about $5 million to $16 million. Not a lot in the context of everything else you fund, but for this system, important. And it's for continued work on increment 2 of the next generation soldier protection system. Some of the planned work cited in the budget materials refers to work on integrating communications, continuing to reduce weight, which we've heard in general is an effort that you are paying a lot of attention to, and possible integration of other advanced technologies into the system in the future. The Army's Natick Soldier Systems Center has been doing work for some time on future technologies. And while it's not in my district, I'm aware of it and have visited there several times and have seen the extraordinary research that's taking place there. And some of those future technologies would include communications, health monitoring. At one point, I learned about injecting sensors so you could detect an injury and send some material to it to help stop the bleeding. Excuse me for my throat. In other areas, it could be miniaturized. So can you provide some details? And I'll drink some water. Sorry.
Ma'am, let me talk to the funding and the acceleration piece. So it goes back to your point about the nature of this integrated system. You have to start with the integration. So 5 key components, right? The hard armor that protects the torso, the vest, all of those things associated with the torso, the extremities, the helmet, which will be lighter and also include upgrades to the blast detection as well as hearing protection. And then this integrated sensor system that you talked about, and I want to talk about that a little more. And then the eye protection. And so although we were looking at these systems simultaneously, the way the funding was allocated, it was going to take us, starting in 16 for the torso, but it wasn't until 19 that we were going to get to the integrated sensor suite that you saw at Picatinny. It's a really important component because what that will allow you to do is not only measure things like heart rate, but it'll also give you feedback on things like hydration. So when you put a load on a soldier and they're operating in a combat environment, how do we have the mechanism to monitor? In order to do that, you also have to tie in the network communication systems. And so we start with this notion of integration, but how do we also, if you're going to add those 5 different components together, how do you make sure that you're continuing to lighten the load? The goal for the entire system is to make it 10 to 15% less weight than what the soldier carries today, even with adding those capabilities. The last piece I'd like to talk about is the eye protection. So one of the more impressive things that they're doing is building transitional eyewear that allows a soldier to move from a dark environment into the light and back and forth without the disorientation that occurs because of that change in environment, while adding about 10% more fragmentation blast protection. And so it's all of those components that make this system and soldier protection so important. So the additional funding helps to get us there sooner.
And I would just add, as a soldier that's carried 2 pairs of glasses for the last 15 years, depending on whether I was inside, I mean, that doesn't sound like much, but that is a huge deal to not have to worry about physically transitioning eye protection. And, you know, the actual lenses do it for you.
I've seen some of the plastics engineering that's going into that lens, and it's pretty remarkable. And I'm curious how the Marine Corps is working with you. Are you working across services? Are you part of this process?
Yes, ma'am, we are. And so I can tell you, I've been working body armor systems, protective systems for the last 10 years within Marine Corps Systems Command, and on a number of systems collaborating with the Army. For example, the enhanced combat helmet that we developed, and now we're in the final stages of fielding the first 77,000 of those. We worked with the Army on that, and they're also fielding that helmet. So we are working with them. We have formal forums that we meet quarterly with the Army, and then informally. My program offices and their program offices, probably a weekly basis, if not more, and then monthly also. So yes, ma'am, we are working with them.
I don't want to keep you all, but I would encourage you, and I assume you're thinking about different climates, because it's not only weight. I don't know what the temperature issues will be, and that you'll also be mindful of women making their way, ever more women making their way into serving, and to not leave that to an afterthought. Thank you both all.
Thank you. We appreciate your presentations today, and we will be adjourned.